talk about death, I think, isn't it? We're going to talk about death and impermanence today. And why? It's always why. Why are we listening to these words? Why are we even saying these things? So that we can, try and think about the meaning. And the crucial point is to try and see the action point from it. Not just fill our heads with clever thoughts, it's pretty useless. It's practice, it's advice. It's advice. It's like cooking class. If I just raved on about how nice cakes are all day and you didn't go away with one recipe, you'd be a bit disappointed. So listen to these words. They're literally recipes. They're, try and extract the advice from the words. That's the point. Of course, you're not forced to take it. You're the boss, not Buddha. That's extremely important to remember. Even as 1% of what you hear, if it makes sense, put it into practice. That's the idea. And what's the benefit of practice? Well, the bottom line for the Buddha is, to develop two wings of the bird. The wisdom wing, which is all the nuts and bolts of abiding by the laws of karma and reconfiguring our conceptual stories about the universe, because he says we're up, we're not in touch with reality. So by lessening our neurotic states of mind, by reconfiguring our views of the universe, bringing them into sync with reality, this brings our own happiness, our own fulfillment, fulfills our own purpose, as the Lamas would say. And then we practice the compassion wing, and we will fulfill the purpose of others. Two wings of the bird. Compassion is the point. But as His Holiness says, compassion is not enough. As Lama Zopa says, meaning well is not enough. You've got to have wisdom. Our compassion actions have to be informed by wisdom. So by listening to these teachings of the Buddha about how things exist, in this case, impermanence, and the way we end the life and get a new life, it would be, we're listening to this so we can, take this advice so we can learn to live our lives well, so we can die well, so we can carry on our spiritual path without much interruption from life to life, so that we can develop our marvelous potential, so we can be a benefit to others. Thinking like that. So we can sing the prayer on page, whatever it was, Nicole. What was 98. It, 98. That's the Refuge Prayer 3 times. If you'd like to just listen. The meaning, I've just stated it in the earlier words. It's longer, of course. We can sing it in Tibetan. Sangye chadang soke chognam la jangcho badu dagni kyab suchi dagi chunyen gipe sonam ki drola penche sangye drupa shog Sangye chadang soke chognam la jangcho badu dagni kyab suchi dagi chunyen gipe sonam ki drola penche sangye drupa shog Sangye chadang soke chognam la jangcho badu dagni kyab suchi dagi chunyen gipe sonam ki drola penche sangye drupa shog. All right. Okay. So one of the very first teachings the Buddha gave actually is the thing, we talked about this a bit, is that from his observation, remember it's not revelation. The Buddha's teachings aren't coming from on high. They're coming from his own mind, his own observations. It's really important to remember his observation of the universe, his observation of the workings of the world. And what he observed is, and why he didn't make it up, Buddha doesn't own copyright on these ideas. That's ridiculous. He doesn't create this concept. He's observed it. But guess what, folks? Everything changes. It's like hardly rocket science, isn't it? Really. Anybody with half a brain can see this is true. So why is it it's so much problem for us in our lives when we keep bumping into that reality, and why do we suffer so much when things do change? Or, like I said before, if everything's going beautifully, like always I use, the example of Nicole when she was with Tom, we will be together until we are 80, she said with certainty, because she was attached to that little bubble. So you project this lie upon it, another lie that says it will last forever. There's a very strong impulsiveness. And then, of course, when the bubble bursts, and in fact, Tom left her well before 80, they were 80, put it like that, then she fell into despair. Then the tragedy is when the bad things are there, you don't believe that will change either. It's unbearable. You can't see the light at the end of the tunnel. I mean, this is the daily way that we suffer terribly. And this is Buddha's key point. If we can get this point, like I said already, if we can get this key point, which initially is quite surprising, that the extent to which we suffer in life is the extent to which we are not in touch with reality. I mean, it sounds very abstract initially, but this is so evident, you know. So the very first teaching, as we know, if we study the Lama, the very first teaching, entry level, right at the beginning, is guess what, people? We're going to die. So why? It's interesting. Why at this point does a teacher who these teachings of the Lama, this packaging, as we know, this packaging of Buddha's teachings, you know, expressed by the Tibetans, particularly in this case the Gelugpas, our lineage in Tibet, but all the Tibetans are all fairly similar in their way of packaging Buddha's teachings. You know, a teacher came along in the 11th century. Dharma had been in Tibet for a couple of hundred years, maybe 300 by that point, and flourishing. You know, the Vajrayana was flourishing. But I think he sort of got it down to earth again. He kind of put this packaging together of extracting from all the vast body of knowledge that had been studied for centuries in the great Indian monastic university system, in the Nalanda tradition. As His Holiness always says, we are the Nalanda tradition. The Nalanda tradition, meaning referring to the Nalanda Monastery, you know. I like to insert my commercial. So this is a commercial. You don't tell because I say it in the same voice. When we go on this pilgrimage, you know, to India and Nepal, we've been for 20 years. It raises money for the prison project. We go to the places where Lord Buddha put his holy feet, and it's a wonderful experience. I mean, I've been on more than 20, and I'm not bored yet. You know, when the next one we're going to be in February next year. So one of the places we go, although technically it's not where Buddha put his feet, I mean, he might have, is this place called Nalanda Monastery. This amazing institution, you know, that was 7th, 8th, 9th, flourished from maybe 4th, 5th century, 7th, 8th, 9th, 10th, and then began to degenerate. And that was unfortunate because it's the way the world is with the influx of Islam into India. It's just the way it is historically. I'm not criticizing. Buddhism kind of collapsed, you know. But this Nalanda Monastery was an astonishing place. And we go to the ruins of it. It's just not very far from Vulture Peak, this wonderful place where Buddha gave many of his teachings, including the Heart Sutra, you know. It's a marvelous little place up on a hill. And Nalanda Monastery is near there. These vast ruins. And they've only uncovered about 10% of it, apparently. But I love this place. It's so special. And that's where all the names we hear if we study any teachings, any of us in Tibetan Buddhism, you hear Nagarjuna, Chandrakirti, you hear Tisha, all these people, they're all from this marvelous institution, you know. And so what happened is in 7th, 8th century, Guru Rinpoche, when Nalanda was flourishing, you know, he and then others followed, brought it in their minds into Tibet. And it's been flourishing since then, as we know, of course, until 1950, and their next door neighbors barged in, and then the poor Tibetans had to leave, but still, it's still living and alive in the minds of the practitioners, particularly in the Tibetan Buddhist monastic university system in India, and then, you know, around the world, hopefully. So that we are the Nalanda tradition, as His Holiness said. So all the vast body of knowledge studied there is where Atisha looked and took and extracted from this the main points of all this body of knowledge and presented this packaging that's the basis of Tsongkhapa in the 14th century, his Lam Rim. And what it is, he took the essence of all this body of knowledge and presented them in an orderly way, orderly according to the capacity of the disciple. So it's necessarily experiential. The point of the Lam Rim is we need to hear it and apply it experientially. That's what the Lam Rim is. And so the very first teaching, entry level, junior school, grade 1, right at the beginning of the so-called lowest scope, the first thing a teacher gets us to think about is impermanence, but not just regular impermanence. Because his agenda is to give us a wake-up call. Now, as we all very well know, before that, there's a preliminary contemplation that he gets us to think about, which is the so-called preciousness of this human life, which is when you first hear it, it's such an odd idea. Who would have thought they had a precious human rebirth? We don't think like that, do we, you know? So he would get us to think about the precious qualities of this human life. And the action point from that is, hey, guys, don't waste it. How fortunate you are. But then you enter into the practice and you begin with impermanence. So a teacher doesn't, Tsongkhapa and a teacher don't want to, you know, just to think about impermanence. They've got subtle impermanence, which is astonishing. You can actually confuse subtle impermanence with emptiness. It's quite subtle, but he doesn't worry about that. He wants us to think about the obvious, the evident, the gross impermanence, that something that comes into being will break and die. But not even just that, because his agenda is to continue to increase our wake-up call to not waste this precious life. Now, these things take us time because we're so much ego grasping. We take our life for granted. Even if it is a good life, we just think, oh, well, I'm lucky, you know, whatever. Whereas, you know, we realize it's so precious, the conditions we have got. This really takes time to think this and to see this life as a precious resource. Then we increase that wish not to waste this precious life by realizing it's impermanent. So a teacher gets us to think about not just death, not as impermanence, but the particular impermanence of death. Whose death? My death. So why does he want us to do this? Not to freak us out, but to give us a wake-up call, not to waste this precious life. This is his agenda. So there's two ways of describing the death process or talking about death. One is from the sutra perspective, which is this one. But the other, of course, as we know, as I've mentioned, the framework of all the Tibetan Buddhist teachings is the Vajrayana. That's it's implied in all the teachings, you know. And so the Vajrayana point of view, from the Vajrayana point of view, the death process described in great detail. The great yogis, you know, utilize this in their meditations. So as Lama Zopa Rinpoche's book, How to Face Death Without Fear, he goes into great detail about both of these, of course, you know, but the particular one, the death process itself, is very fascinating. So we'll go into that. As well as, of course, the first one, let's get the wake-up call and think about how everything is impermanent, how this particular person, me, I am impermanent. So as we know, our teacher talks about that from 3 points of view. The very first point is that, you know, death is definite, he says. And we go, yeah, okay, we know that. Give me something more exciting. But we don't get it, he says. And this is what is utterly fascinating. I mean, it's so fascinating. We can prove it pretty easily that everybody dies. We know death is definite. Anybody with half a brain would never, ever dare to say that you're not going to die. You know, you'd be seen as silly. But why is what we've got to look at why we don't believe it. We know death is definite, but we don't want to think about it. So this is contemplation here, and it's something we can do every single day. You got to remember is to sort of to break through, and this is the point, these primordially deep misconceptions. I mean, they're held deep in the bones of our being, Buddha would suggest, from countless lifetimes of grasping at things, in particular, me as permanent. We know very well it's not true, but experientially is another whole discussion. I mean, even my friends on death row, you know, if anybody can be certain they're going to die at some point, you could argue that as a person on death row. But my friend, you know, they say, no, you still feel permanent like everybody else. You know vaguely a death somewhere in the future. As maybe if it's tonight, you might get the wake-up call. I mean, one of our friends in Georgia, I think, we were able to talk to him on the telephone. He was extraordinary. He had realized death and impermanence. You could tell. He was going to die like a week or so. And he was given permission to talk to people, you know. And he'd been in touch with Lama Zopa, and he had his Vajrasattva practice, and he was blissful. Or there was nothing, he knew there was nothing else to think about except his practice. Nothing. There was no point. He was going to be dead in a week or so, going to, you know, electrocute him or whatever they did to him. I don't know. My friend Mitchell on death row in Kentucky, I'm ready for that electric jolt, he said. He's been there 30 plus years. He's done all his appeals, you know. He's been practicing for 25 years. Amazing fellow. He even has the teachings in his dreams now. He's so incredible. You know, this regular guy, this southern Mexican, this white Kentucky boy, you know, an old grandfather by now, been in some kind of shootout with drugs and guns, and people die, you know. He's not a psychopath. He's come to terms with his life. He sits down in his red jumpsuit, gets up at 5 in the morning, does all his practices. Totally content. I mean, really content. I'm ready for that electric jolt. And one of the last times I saw him, when I visited a couple of years ago, he's still alive. He said he was trying to work out what was the best way for him when they came. The fellow came and was in front of him like this and had to get him ready for the execution. Because he was tried in the 80s. So he has to be electrocuted, even though now it's illegal. It's so bizarre, these weird laws, you know. So it's going to be, this fellow will come up to him and put wires all over his body or something and put them on his head, then put a sponge on his head, then put a cloth over his head. And he was trying to work out whether it's best he should be thinking of compassion for this fellow, like this far to him, this close to him, you know, or whether he should just be focusing on his own practice. I said, let him do his job. It's okay. Have compassion, but focus on your own practice, you know. Well, that's intense, isn't it? So he maybe realizes impermanence, you know. So the very first one is death is definite. So what's that mean? And the thing is, how do you apply it? You can do a nice meditation on your cushion, but the real time is in your daily life. We see and hear all the time now. We're bombarded, isn't it, with hearing about death. You see the ants, you see the rats, you see the cockroaches, especially in Florida, where there's masses of creatures when it comes to the summer, isn't it? I mean, you see death all around us. But you know what? It doesn't touch us until it becomes our people. We know that. Strangers die, animals, creatures, bugs, If it gets a bit close, if it's like a little doggy that we like and it dies, we get a bit freaked out. But the real learning, and this is the key, simple way to make it a real experience for us. You say, that'll happen to me. Until we say that, death is always someone else dying. As Lama Zopa says, we divide the world into living people and dying people. And it's really true. You think about someone you've heard, Auntie Mary's dying. Oh, really? She's dying? You're talking hushed tones. You can't have a proper conversation with a dying person. They're not a real person, are they? I mean, in other words, you don't have a life. We think that. And it's the most bizarre division. I'm a living person, oh, there's a dying person. You don't want to talk about dying people. You don't want to look at dying people. I remember reading years ago in Time magazine about some fellow, the CEO of some big company. And he got MS or something, one of these slow working diseases. And he thought he said he wouldn't tell, there's no reason to tell anyone, but he thought he should tell his board of directors. Well, I mean, they fired him in a week. Who wants a dying person running an organization? How revolting, I mean, look at how we're like this, aren't we? The thought of a dying person is too horrific to us. But as Lama Zopa said, it's a complete joke. It's really a bizarre concept. We are literally all dying people. I mean, and we think that's a joke. But the only difference is we don't know when, that's all. So we have this hubris because we don't know our death date, because I haven't got a disease. Suddenly I'm not dying. We actually believe that. Look at our mind, riddled with these misconceptions. So we've got to cut past it. So all you've got to do is when you see the ant die, that'll be me. When it gets really close to home, when your beloved dog will die, or your beloved auntie will die, your grandma, or your beloved boyfriend, or your baby, the grief is incredible, but still we don't get the message. You've got to say, that'll be me. That's the real learning, That will be me. And then you're forced to think about it. But it's not to make us freak out. That's the point. We think it's supposed to make us freak out. No, it's a wake-up call. But then the second point, getting closer to home. Death is definite, but the time of death is not definite. That's absolutely scientific truth, You can project. I mean, if you're 97, you kind of know you might die soon. We know that. But we know if you do your market research, I mean, like I've often talked, fetuses, I bet you more fetuses die than babies. I wouldn't be surprised. Abortions and miscarriages, Fetuses die, babies die, 1-year-olds die. And often we say there's no medical reason. We don't know why. Well, the Buddha would say the karmic petrol tank ran out, Your non-killing karma ran out. And there you are. People just die right there. They stop breathing right there. No warning. People die of accidents. People die of sickness. People just die. And it's always shocking to us. But especially if you die for no medical reason, it really puzzles us. We do not know what to do with that. We cannot work it out. It's because we have so many other assumptions and somehow it's wrong. You shouldn't have died, So we can see our minds are riddled with all these assumptions that we just believe them as true. They're all rooted in an assumption of permanence. Somehow death is a terrible mistake. I mean, it's interesting in the medical profession, more and more these days, maybe the last 20 years in all different countries where I go around, in Europe and Australia, let's say here, there's more and more awareness now of this, and people working, even electing to work in the hospice, for example, in the hospice movement, working with dying people, working with dying babies. It's very shocking to us, I mean, the whole assumption of our medical systems is to keep a person alive as long as possible. That's the default. Now it's the other extreme, unfortunately. We're knocking people off with giving them drugs, we've gone to the other extreme. I was very moved one time in a conference in Australia. These young doctors and nurses were choosing to work with the dying. I remember I went to a conference, it's so moving, a conference in a hospital for dying children and babies, the worst one for our minds. We can't cope with that. This wonderful doctor trying to get past all the fears. So I gave a talk at this conference. Of course, it's not religious, of course, it's just trying to help people cut through the fears and accept the reality. And he was such a good man, you know. I remember the nurse, the morgue for the dead babies and children. He had it decorated like a nursery, and it was open. And the brothers and sisters would come in and out. Come and meet my dead brother, they'd say, you know, trying to bring death more into people's reality. It was so moving. And it's a lovely, lovely, kind doctor. Trying to get past all the fears about death and the guilt for the parents, you know. I mean, this is marvelous, confronting it more. But the real learning here is, this will happen to me. And that's when it's a wake-up call. Until then, it's not a wake-up call. You'll have grief, you'll have sadness when your dog dies, but until you realize that's going to be me, then you're forced to face it, you know. This is so powerful, so simple. That's going to happen to me. Of course, we don't like to say that. I made a joke to one of my sisters, you know, I'm getting close to death. She freaked out. But it's just a simple fact, you know. That's okay, I don't mind. It's a fact. I'm closer to death than birth, guaranteed. Do you understand? It was like a terrible thing to say, you know. Or we say things like, oh, I feel so young. I mean, people who feel young die. I'm sorry. Or I feel so alive. We say it. Oh, I feel so alive, we'll say. Or I feel like death, we'll say. Who cares what we feel, you know? They throw us. So it's a simple thing. And the constant point is, what's the action from this? What's the point of this? It's the wake-up call. So the third one is the point. The third one. So given the Buddha's view, of course, that our consciousness is not physical, it's a beginningless and endless continuity of mental moments, as nutty as it sounds to us, given that every millisecond of what I think and do and say programs my mind, sows seeds in my mind, that seeds being what they are will necessarily ripen in the future in my mind, as His Holiness says, the law of karma is like self-creation. Then given more precisely, next level of precision, given that so-called negative actions will ripen as my suffering and positive actions will ripen as my happiness. And then finally, given that, thank you very much, I don't want suffering, but I do want happiness. Well, then it follows logically, you know. But at the time of death, the only thing is practical. It's a practical issue. It's not, don't think of it as religious, don't think of it as fearful. It's a practical issue. The only thing that's of any use to me at that moment, the only thing I can bring with me is the karmic seeds in my mind. And I don't want the negative ones to ripen, thank you very much, so they can take a back, you know, they can take a back seat. I want the positive ones. So that when I do die at the time of death, which we'll describe, at the time of death, very specifically at a certain point about the time before you stop breathing, a virtue is one of the karmic seeds that will determine your next life is triggered at that point. So it's a very technical, precise thing. So given that I then want a positive one to be triggered, so that even before I stop breathing, my next human rebirth is organized, is booked up, then it's clear what I should do then. Try to stop practicing non-virtue and try to practice virtue. That's the conclusion. That's the conclusion. Of course, all this is based on Buddha's views. You know, it's up to us which views we want to take. And it's up to us is the point. It's up to us. I think we're so used to saying we've been Christian or Muslim or Jewish. We're sort of so used to believing that God is the boss, and I'm surely God will see I'm a good girl and He'll send me to a nice place. It's still very strong in us. I'm sure Lama Zopa sees I'm a really good girl. I'm sure He'll take care of me. You can't help but still think someone else is going to look after me. But when you realize karma, which comes later in the Lam Rim, you're in charge. You know, you got to sow the seeds, baby. You know, the holy beings will do their best, but I've got to sow the right seeds. So it's in my hands. So impermanence and death is a really powerful concept, but it's so shocking for us. It's so blunt and shocking, you know, in our culture. We don't like to think about it. So the Lamas will say just getting a genuine experiential realization of this truth completely transforms your life. Everything falls into place. Cuts your fears. You got no waste. You don't want to waste time. You don't just want to follow attachment. You want to start focusing on what is appropriate practice. You're so energized not to waste this precious life, you know. I mean, that's the way to go. Forget realization of bodhicitta. Forget realizing emptiness. Forget giving up attachment even. Even just this one is profound if we can get it, you know. a wake-up call, not to waste this precious life. And not wasting this precious life is to follow attachment, follow anger, follow depression, follow the anxieties. I mean, we're normal people, but to be on the case with practice, to have a decent practice, understand how to apply these practices in our daily life, be wise and skillful so we don't waste our life. I mean, we all, in a sense, we feel it. We want that, you know. This is how we get the wake-up call. First one, impermanence, you know. But it takes time because the belief, the grasping, as Lama Zopa puts it, the grasping of permanent me is primordially deep. This is like a deep philosophical view in the bones of our being that we have held for countless lifetimes, the Buddha would say, you know. So even though intellectually we know perfectly well we will die. And as Lama Zopa says, it's best to think, I will die today. Now, I say that all the time to myself. But I swear to you, I do not believe it. Do you understand? I'll say the words, Rabina, you could die today. But the wall, the thickness of the delusion, you can see it, it's very humbling. The thickness of this impulse to grasp at a permanent me is so intense. It's like you're hearing it through 27 walls of bricks, you know, like a distant voice. Even you shout at yourself, you know, doesn't help. So all you can do is say it every day and chip away, you know. Best to think, I'll die today. Well, it sounds so shocking in our culture, like you're mentally ill, you know, to think that. No, wake you up. Because all it means is, if I die today, what karmic seeds do I want to be most prevalent at the time my mind leaves the body? It's the virtuous ones. So the conclusion is I better start just keeping on the straight and narrow and get a sense of what my practice is and do it appropriately. Of course, to the best of our ability. You can't do more than you are. You can't do more than you're capable of. So it kind of narrows things down, gives you perspective. Then it's like a joke to think you're not going to forgive your husband for being mean to you. You know? Of course, darling, don't worry about it. I love you. So it's an interesting point. It really is. It's just so powerful. So remembering this every day. Remembering this every day gets things into perspective, you know. And of course, because in our culture, we think if you think about death, you get depressed. It's the opposite, because you're confronting it. You get depressed because death is so terrifying, we don't want to think about it. That's why we get depressed. We try to push it away. But it's reality. Facing reality is the opposite of fear. Facing reality is the opposite to fear. This is what's interesting. When you're facing the truth, that cuts fear. This is very, very clear. Very fascinating. That we live in fear because we can't stand to think about it. You know? We try to push it away. And because we're so attached to our doggies, our pussies, our mummies, our daddies, our babies, our bodies, we're mostly attached to ourselves, you know, they say. So let's talk about the death process itself then, okay? This is very fascinating. Excuse me. This is from the Vajrayana. In Lama Zopa Rinpoche's book, there's a chapter called Death is What the Yogis Have Been Waiting For. Of course, it's so shocking again, you know, so weird to think like this. And this is straight from the Vajrayana. It's very fascinating because the death process itself, which is described in this, it's described in 8 stages of this gradual deconstruction of the components of the person. It's the best way to put it, you know. This gradual deconstruction of the components of the person, described in 8 stages. The first level is when the gross consciousness, which is inextricably linked to this bag of bones, ceases to function. That's the first 4. And gross consciousness is referring to the sensory consciousnesses. So at each step, for example, the eye consciousness goes at the same time in the first stage of the 8 steps. And this, we'll go into this in a second, but the 8 stages, this is incorporated by all the great yogis in their deity yoga practices. So if we've received an empowerment, especially highest yoga tantra, then we'll know that this is incorporated. And it's a marvelous way. The sadhanas, as Lama Zopa says, the sadhanas are constructed in such a way that you bring this meditation into your daily practice. And it's the best way to prepare for death, he said. And the point here is, of course, why death is what the yogis have been waiting for, is because through their meditation throughout their lives, they've got single point of concentration. They've got shamatha, for example. They've accessed this subtle level of their mind, and they've got their deity yoga organized. So they're able to go through that process when they absorb the deity into them and go through the actual process of dissolution as if it were like the death process. And they're able to get their mind to the same subtle level in their meditation. They practice this every day. So why death is so fantastic for them is because the mind, at the time of death, the mind, the clear light, you got gross consciousness, the senses linked to this gross body. Then you've got subtle consciousness, which is what we dream with, which is our mental states actually. And that's connected to the subtler physical energies, the 72,000 subtle channels in the body, like a subtle nervous system. This is the same as the Tibetan medical system, you know, similar to the Chinese one, similar to the Ayurvedic one. And that is in all these different wind energies coursing through these channels, all inextricably linked to our different states of mind. There's a very intimate relationship between mind, the subtler levels of mind, our mental states, and these different wind energies. So they gradually cease. You go through the first 4 stages where the breath, first the eye consciousness goes, the earth element, and the ear consciousness, and the water element, and then the fire element, the heat in the body, and the eye, you know, the nose consciousness. Each of the senses ceases. And by the time about the third level, before you start to stop hearing, this is when the karmic seed from your bank vault of billions of karmic seeds that will determine your next life will be triggered. So if your mind is peaceful and virtuous, and as Lama Zopa says in his book, if you want to help anybody in this life when they need you most, is at the time of death. And why is very simple, because you need to be relaxed and peaceful when you die. There's a powerful level of grasping that ripens at the time of death, intense grasping naturally. So if you have a friend and a beloved, whether the dog is dying, your grandma's dying, if you can help them navigate this process, enabling them to be peaceful because they trust you and love you. We all need someone to look after us. Most of us aren't great yogis. If there's a great yogi, leave them alone. They know what they're doing. You know, you need to have enable a person to be peaceful. And if they're peaceful, that helps trigger a virtuous karmic seed, which is in our case, from our past death, more than a few weeks before we found our way to our present mother's human womb, we can deduce that we must have been peaceful because a virtuous karmic seed was triggered, which programmed us to get this human body. It's no accident. We created it. So that's when people need us most, to help them navigate the death process, because it is in its nature very fearful, because grasping is very strong. And why the grasping? Because we grasp, as Lama Zopa says, the attachment is to more than anything, the attachment is to this, is to me, because we believe this body is me. That's what the attachment at the time of death is about. More than for our beloveds and everything. Is intense primordial attachment to this body. So you need a person to hold your hand, basically. We can all see when we're sick, when we're miserable, we desperately need someone to support us, to hold us emotionally, you know, and that's the most precious way you can help at the time of death. Mirage's advice is all about that in this book, you know, I highly recommend it to everybody. Because someone's going to die, you know, your body, your ants will die, the birds will die, your dog will die, your mummy will die, you will die. And this advice in the book, much of it, came at a time of a teaching in France. It was actually 2001. Rinpoche was giving a teaching on some other topic. This is talked about in the preface, because I edited the book. So in the preface, we discussed this. Rinpoche said that at this teaching, one of his older students came and said to him, Rinpoche, my father died recently and I didn't know what to do. Now, she was an old student. He was shocked, because we all hear about death. But because we don't want to know about it, we don't think about it. We don't study it, you know. We just, oh yeah, it's death at some point. And then she didn't know what to do to help her old daddy, you know. So we say change direction, and he gave this teaching. The bulk of the teachings in the book come from that particular teaching, you know. How to help at the time of death. And when you even just reading the book gives you courage. You kind of, because it's full of advice, you know what to do when. It's all about the different things about what karma is and what it is, and the death process, and this business of the death is what the yogis in waiting for, all the different things. And then as the main advice is what to do the weeks and months before, what to do the days before, the hours before, at the time the breath stops, after the breath stops, after the mind leaves the body, and then the next weeks after that. It's chronological. And the 2/3 of the book at the back is like 87 different practices, all numbered, you know. Choosing best techniques to do to help. Just to know what to do is extremely helpful. For your pussycat, for your dog, for your cat, for the mouse, for the ant, for the bird, sentient beings, you know. There's ways of helping them die peacefully. That enables a virtuous karmic seed to be triggered, which enables them to get a human rebirth, at least, so they can carry on, you know, get a decent human rebirth. This life is over. This is why at the time of death is when they need us most. This is the exact opposite of what we think in our culture, you know. So okay, the death process. It's so okay. Why it's the, why the yogis why it's what they've been waiting for is because the whole point is we need to get all the realizations, to realize impermanence, to realize about karma, to realize body, all things, especially to realize emptiness, which is what cuts the root of all delusions. The mind, the only type of level of mind that can realize that is a super focused, concentrated one. So 99% of us in this life won't get shamatha. We won't get samadhi. We're not going to, unless you go to the mountains, you can get it, you know. Some people, the yogis have been practicing all their lives. But the point is, you go through the process in your meditation, but you get to the subtlest level. They got gross consciousness ceases, subtle mind ceases, and even they talk about very subtle mind and the very subtle physical energy. They call that the clear light mind. Well, that clear light mind, the subtlest level of the mind, this is like the microscope of the mind. It's that level of mind that is easily able to get realizations and even get enlightened. And the clear light mind of death is the most potent, the most powerful, the most amazing. That's exactly why literally the yogis have been practicing all their lives, and that's when they'll get to the subtlest mind and they're able to utilize that, and many can get enlightened at that point. So it's a practical issue, technical. Most of us, if we haven't got realizations, we won't do that. At least we can be familiar with the practice and do it in our meditation occasionally, you know, and then even might be able to recognize some of the signs when we die. So what's fascinating about this process, this death process described in 8 stages, is exactly the same as going to sleep. It sounds very peculiar to us, but it's physiologically and psychologically the same thing occurs. That's why the great yogis can utilize their sleep in their meditation, go to the subtle level, because the dream mind is the subtle mind. So we know, you're tired one day, suddenly you're asleep, and next minute you wake up 8 hours later, you know. We're not aware of the process at all. We couldn't possibly do that. But the great yogis can be in complete control, you know, go through the process and get to the subtle level without losing consciousness. They're able to get to the very subtle level. That's why the great yogis do not sleep, don't need sleep. Lama Zopa Rinpoche is famous for never sleeping. He never lies down. He sits up, you know. He meditates day and night. If he's not working to help other people, he's meditating. They don't need sleep, these dudes, you know, these holy dudes, holy yogis. We can become like. They're showing us how to be. Venerable Roger, Lama Zopa's Australian attendant monk, he said, for Rinpoche, sleep is a disgusting waste of time. Can you imagine? Or even there's another one, Lama, one of our yogis, Geshe Lama Kontrab. He was in Kopan. You might have met him when you were there. I don't know. This old grumpy old grandpa Lama. He lived in Vajrayogini's Pure Land, Lama Zopa said. He lived up in the mountains for years and years, naked, no sleep, no food, no water, living in meditation day and night, in 6 foot of snow in the winter, in a naked hole in the wall, because they're able to completely control the elements of their body, completely go to the subtlest level, living in bliss, getting realizations as quickly as possible. Amazing, these holy beings, you know. We're capable of all of this. Instead, look at us, you know, our houses and air conditionings and 10 hours of sleep a night and meals, and we have to feel guilty just comparing. It's okay. We can aspire. See, that's the thing for me when I go to bed at night. There's no way in the universe I can say I can't sleep at night. There's no way. It's just not possible. So I don't pretend. I don't get guilty. So when I hit the pillow, isn't it true when you get older? Isn't sleep divine? Haven't people noticed how divine sleep is? I mean, as I'm doing my practice at night, all I'm thinking of is that bed, you know. And Margaret's got a very comfortable bed, I tell you. There's a nice layer on top. It's a very delicious bed, I promise you. So all I'm thinking of is going to oblivion and to sleep, you know. It's very deep attachment, isn't it? When I'm doing my morning practice, all I'm thinking of is my breakfast. Do you understand? I've sorted out Margaret's fridge. I know what's there. I know how to make her coffee. She has a coffee machine that does 1 coffee. Well, I have to use 3 pods so I can get espresso, you know. So I keep applying. She'll have coffee, no coffee left very soon. Have you checked to check your box? You still got enough, you think?
Oh, I have a whole box full.
Oh, good, you've got a whole box. I know, but the whole box is coming. It's 3 out of it every morning. Okay, you better watch it. Anyway, when I'm doing my morning practice, I'm anticipating my coffee, you know. and my which I'll have this morning. I have my muesli. It's terrible attachment. It's so shocking. The sleep one is very fascinating, isn't it? Anyway, when I hit the pillow, every night, I say to myself, sincerely, may I find sleep disgusting. Do you understand? Because you've had to program your mind with new habits. See, that's how, if we understand karma, that's how things work. You wake up with certain habits, or you got habits, you got to change your habits. Well, I can't change overnight. So you got to program my mind. So maybe hopefully next life, I only want to sleep 3 hours a night and not waste time. I'm not pretending I can do it now. So you got to program for the future, And the other thing I do, we're going to have to talk about this more. There's going to be no time tonight. Because one of the practices in the book is the practice by Tsongkhapa, this wonderful verses, this prayer to go to Amitabha's Pure Land after you die. It's a whole other discussion. We're going to have to talk about this. We've got more days, we can do it. But there's this particular prayer, and there's a chapter in Rinpoche's book about Amitabha's Pure Land. I'll talk about that later. That's also what I do. When I lie on the pillow, I get my iPad, I press the button, and I've got my own voice reciting that prayer, and I go to sleep with that prayer in my mind, hoping I'll go to, praying to go to Amitabha's Pure Land. I'll talk about this later. Okay. Okay, where is that? The death process. Okay, so what happens is roughly speaking, a series of things occurs at each of these 8 stages. And of course, this model is based on this old-fashioned, like we used to have in our culture, the view of the Chinese, the Indians, and so forth, of these elements, the earth elements. I mean, we don't talk like that anymore, do we? We used to talk that way. Earth element, water element, fire element, air element, the various elements, 35 things altogether, 35 components gradually cease to function, gradually, step by step by step. And you need to become familiar with this, and you train yourself in your meditation to familiarize yourself with this process, And then eventually you become a yogi, you'll actually be doing it literally. So the first one is, the first of the 8. Each of the 8 is labeled in terms of a particular, what they call a subtle kind of sign or a vision that occurs at each stage. We're not at all conscious of these, but they happen. So you've got to train your mind to think it's happening. So the first one's called Mirage. So what happens is various things happen. I'll keep it simple. But one of the 5 aggregates ceases, never mind that. But the earth element begins to cease. So you know yourself when you're really tired, your body's like lead, isn't it? This is exactly what happens here. Your body gets very heavy. Even you feel like you're sinking. And I remember this experience when I was in India, the late 80s, I think, early 90s. And if you've lived in Delhi in the summer, you'll know it's the hottest place on the planet. I mean, not quite, but Bodhgaya's even hotter. It sears your lungs, the heat. It's beyond belief. So Delhi is like 50 degrees Celsius every day, 120 degrees, 110 degrees, ruthless, relentless heat until the rains come. And millions of people live on the streets in Delhi, But I remember working in Delhi at the time at our center there. And I got hepatitis. So you turn bright yellow. But also what happened when I was living in the center, didn't have any air conditioning. I'll never forget this as long as I live, But also I happened to have malaria at the same time. But no one recognized because I was bright yellow. So they saw the hepatitis until one day, like 10 days or 2 weeks into it. And I lost like 20 pounds in 10 days. Because it's 110, 20 degrees inside, no AC. I'm hallucinating from these unbelievable fevers. And as soon as a person saw me in a fever, they recognized it was malaria. And I had malaria and hepatitis together. And one Lama there in Delhi, he said I was close to death. I mean, you don't know you're close to death. You just know you feel terrible. And I knew I had to get out of India. So I remember I rang my sister. I was hallucinating. I'd hallucinate every day. I was hallucinating, having these cold showers. I felt like I was burning up, It's most amazing experience. So I remember I managed to ring my sister in Australia, and I said, I've got to get back to Australia, So she flew halfway around the world to pick me up. She came to Singapore, and I flew from Delhi, and they let me fly bright yellow. It was incredible. I managed to get a flight, I was hallucinating to Singapore. And I remember in Singapore in the hotel, first of all, there was AC. It was like if there's heaven, I went to it. Do you understand? I will never forget as long as I live this AC, It was an extraordinary experience after that heat and that hallucinating. And then I remember I was sinking into the bed. That's what I'm trying to get to. That feeling when the earth element ceases, your body feels like it's sinking, and Rinpoche says you almost will reach up to hold on to something. I had that experience. So I really was close to death, but I obviously didn't die yet. I'm still perky and alive. So anyway, there's a long story to tell you. So the earth element, and you even like your body's sinking. And then your eye consciousness goes, and we all know this experience. If I'm sitting there, I can't see anything without my glasses. Oh, there's Nicole. That's right. So there's Nicole. We know this experience. I'm sitting there talking to Nicole. I'm sitting up, and you're so tired. You just can't see anything, isn't it? We know that experience. Because the eye consciousness is beginning to go. Everything's kind of deconstructing, all dissolving inwards, all through from all the various channels, all coming together in what they call the central channel, the energies, the wind energies, and then the different states of mind connected to those winds. They say the mind rides on the winds. So the earth ceases, the eyes ceases, the first stage. And then there's this vision. They say there's this vision of like a mirage. So what's a mirage? Interplay of earth and water, isn't it? So the next element is the water element to go. This all happens very smoothly, you know, and it can often take can usually take 2 hours, or it could be less, or it could be much longer. It depends on the person. So then the ear element, then the ear consciousness goes. So I'm sitting there talking to Michelle, to Nicole, and suddenly I didn't hear what she just said the last 3 seconds. You understand? We all have that experience. You're still sitting upright. Eyes, your body feels heavy, your eyes, they're open, but you can't see, everything's going inward. Then the ears go, the water element ceases, the liquids begin to dry up in your body. And then the sign is like, they say, it's like sort of smoky, interplay of water. And then the next one, which is fire. I'm just saying a few things here, not all of them. Then your fire element, the heat in your body gradually ceases. And the way they say it is the heat, all the energies of the body gradually coming up from the feet and go down from the head, and everything finally gathers right here in the center at the heart chakra, in these channels. All the different states of mind leave all the channels. This is what happens when you go to sleep. And all the different winds go in, and everything gathers into the central channel, and eventually everything gathers here. That's the 8th stage. That's what happens when you go to sleep as well. So then the third one is the third sign is sparks, like interplay of fire and then air. The fourth one, I'm just saying them briefly here. The third one, I think the nose consciousness ceases. The fourth one is, and by this point is when the karmic, okay, but at this point, before you stop breathing, before you stop losing the plot completely, another little set of things called the 12 links of dependent arising, they have a particular function at death. They now kick in, and there's this intense grasping. The 9th link, which is occurring every second in daily life, is first attachment, craving ripens, which is 8th link, intense attachment, an intense extra level of intense attachment to what? Mostly this, instinctively not wanting to let go of this. The fear of it is incredible. Attachment. Then the grasping is even more powerful. And it's at that point that grasping functions to trigger the number 2 of the 12 links, which is your bank vault of karmic seeds. So anyway, you're freaking out because it's natural for most people. But if you've got a beloved there playing mantras to you, talking to you, in a sense, metaphorically holding your hand, it'll calm you down, and you'll be able to keep your mind steady and keep your mind virtuous. The same for your doggy. You're playing the mantras, your doggy sees you, she trusts you, and the mantras are going into their mind, and you can help them be peaceful at this point. And that will enable a virtuous karmic seed to be triggered. If the mind's freaking out, and this is a tragedy, most people die with fear. I remember a friend of mine worked in hospice, and she said, unless people had a spiritual practice, they were very distressed at death, because no one talks about death. Many people are left in these, unfortunately, as dumped by their families and drugged out of their brains in these hospitals or places, old people's homes, and no one's helping them, no one's supporting them. They toss and they turn, and there's nowhere to turn, no one to help. So many people. It's so tragic, just to be there with a person. We know this is true. You know yourself when you're distressed. The first thing we do is we turn to somebody. I always think about when you're a kid, if you're lucky to have a good mother and father, when you fall over or something terrible happens, what do you think you do? You pick yourself up and you make a beeline to mummy. Mummy, as if the whole world collapses. Do you understand? And then what does mummy do? I find this so profound. Oh, darling, it's all right. And she'll give you a hug, and you will believe her. That's how you help people who have fear. You can't take their death away from them, but you make them feel safe and secure. This is really the most precious gift. It's so simple. Do you understand me, people? You make a person feel loved and secure, and that's all a person needs. They're not trying to make you heal them. You can't take the pain away. But if you bring your own fears and your own junk to the death, which is what happens, then everybody's collapsing, you know. It's really powerful, this. Just to be a friend, supporting and loving and kind. A person can see that you're there, holding them emotionally. It's the most precious gift you can give. And then on top of that, you play mantras and all these different practices in the Rinpoche's book, you know. So at this point, before you even stop breathing, hello to Zoom people, I'm not looking at you today, but I'm here again. I am looking at you. You know, at this point, that by the time the fourth one happens, this point, your earth, the body element is the earth element cease, the water element, the fire element, you know, the heat goes from the feet up and from the head down. And interestingly, they say, if the heat has already left the head and the heat is still in the feet, that's not a good sign. That's an indication that already a negative karmic seed has been triggered, which is already programmed for a suffering rebirth. Not that you can do much about it. I mean, you can put a hot water bottle on there. Oh, no, I'm just joking, you know. I mean, that because the heat leaves after the karmic seed has been triggered. So if the heat is left already from the head and the tootsies are still warm, it's better if the feet are cold and the head is still warm. That means the heat leaves the head last. That's better. That's an indication that a virtuous karmic seed has been triggered. All these different things they talk about. So by the time then you stop breathing. The fourth step, the fourth stage is the air element ceases and the breath goes out and it doesn't go in. The tongue, I always quote this, but they say that apparently the tongue goes very short and turns blue at the root. And there's one Lama, Geshe Rabten, as he said, that tongue that's spent its life gossiping is now useless. I think that's wonderful. Stuck in the back of your throat, kind of showing it, you know. So by that point, the world thinks you're ready for the body bag. Because there's no breath, heart has stopped, there's no sign of life, as they say. But that's the point. There is no sign of life, but only the grosser level, gross consciousness. Because we don't posit the subtle one. That's why all these conversations now with scientists is getting, like I said a couple of days ago, I mentioned, forcing now us in the modern world to question our assumptions, which is marvelous, you know. So good that's happening. One of the offerings of His Holiness to the world is incredible. So at this point, the breath has now stopped, and so there's more to go. And this is where, from that point, it can be up to 3 days before the mind leaves the body. So that's why it's always the best from the Buddhist point of view to not disturb the body for at least 3 days, which is very difficult. I mean, my friend Yeshe Kado, who ran Karuna Hospice Service in Australia, it's been going since the 80s in Queensland, which is sort of like Australia's Florida. It's up in the tropics. And they're quite successful and get a lot of government funding. It's a palliative care service. She said most people don't die at home anymore. Most people die in institutions, you know. Well, you can't have much control. I mean, if you're rich and have got a private room, you can run the death of your beloveds. But if not, you're kind of at the whims of the hospitals and the institutions. It's really best to die at home, you know, best. And many Buddhists do this. Then they'll keep the body there, have it like a shrine room. People can roster, take turns to come and do prayers. I mean, like I mentioned, my grandmother, my Catholic grandmother was like that. You know, the nurses came, the doctors, the priests, the nuns came, we did prayers, the rosary for my nanny, you know. That's the best way to die. Best way, quietly. But full of prayers and things can help the person hugely. Your dog as well. Many people allow their pets to stay for 3 days, you know, because you can tell when the consciousness is gone. You can tell. They say it's never longer than 3 days. It can be a lot shorter than 3 days, of course, too. So then the next process, the 5th, 6th, and 7th, and 8th stages, is there's more all the internal energies. And so they talk about the components of the subtle body, like the 72,000 subtle channels, the wind energies, the prana, and this is the basis of health. I mean, the Tibetan medical system, the acupuncture system, they study these winds for years. It's the basis of understanding health. You know very well your Tibetan doctor, or your Chinese doctor, the Tibetan one, will feel your pulses. And she feels the wind energies in particular channels, and she knows that's linked to your attachment or to your anger. And she can see then the symptoms of your anxiety or whatever is going on, you know. So the Tibetans don't do needles so much. They mainly give you herbal medicine, their own herbs they've been getting for thousands of years, you know, or at least 1,000 years. You take herbal medicine, and that'll adjust the wind energies and therefore help the mind as well. You know, it's a very subtle way, very holistic way of working, related to the mind. So anyway, the wind energy, and then in the wind is connected to the mind, the different states of mind, coursing through your body. Of course, we don't think like that in the West. We think it's the brain. This is a different discussion. And then you've also got the subtle liquid energy. Okay, the physical energy, they've got this nervous system, and you've got at different points, you've got a central channel, which starts at about back there, and it goes all the way down in front of the spine and ends at the tip of the penis for the boys and the cervix for the girls. The central channel. And then at each point, up here, 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 and down further, and three, what they call secret ones, internal for the female and external along the penis for the male, are what they call the secret chakras, which is just a configuration, a kind of of these, as a bunch of these channels all knotted together. There's nothing fancy about a chakra. It's just a bunch of knotted up channels, the drag. You want to open them up, you know, so the winds and the mind can go through them, all to get to the central channel, to the very heart chakra here. So anyway, the next stage, the white, there's a third component, sorry, it's called the Kundalini energy. So what this is subtle red one and white one, subtle red and white liquid energy, very subtle, that when your consciousness at the time of your conception went into your mother's fallopian tube, I think, isn't it? Joins the egg and sperm there. They have a different way of describing it. That what the subtler energy of the egg and the sperm from the mummy and daddy are the subtle white liquid energy and the subtle red liquid energy, the subtle ones. And they are they call these the two indestructible drops. So there's this red and white Kundalini here, and then there's this liquid energy as a result of this pervading through the various channels, but the predominance of the one up here is the white one. It's a source of the capacity for the human body to feel happy feelings, and the red one, which is the basis of the heat in the body, mainly stays at the navel chakra. So the white one, the airs go up, and then this is the fifth stage, and the white one then goes down and comes to the heart chakra. And the vision is like this white sky. Then the red one comes up, and each of these stages, various states of our mental states cease to function, getting more subtle, more subtle, more subtle. Then the red one comes up from the navel and comes to the heart chakra. And then ever more subtle states of mind. And then eventually the red and the white one enclose this indestructible drop that your consciousness joined at the time of conception, and that you began at the heart chakra. So as soon as your consciousness joined that subtle red and white drop, it begins here, and then your body grows, the fetus grows from there. So the death process is a reversal process. And then the seventh stage is like this darkness, is when they can combine here and enclose the indestructible drop. And then finally it opens, and that's what they call clear light consciousness, the subtlest level of your conscious being. And the yogis can go through this entire process with complete awareness at ever more subtle levels, meditating on emptiness all the way. And the greatest yogis can stay at the subtlest level, and they can stay there for hours, days, weeks, even months, meditating, removing all the obstacles from the mind and becoming enlightened. This is why death is what the yogis have been waiting for. There's so many stories like that of yogis sitting there meditating at this subtle level, getting really, and it's the subtlest mind, the most powerful. So they're able to get realizations at this point. You know? So if it's your grandma or your doggy, then it'll still happen, but we're not going to be conscious of it. You know, so then you take care of them. You look after them, you say prayers, you have pujas and prayers done, you make it peaceful in that room. Because the subtle mind, as long as it's there, and that's that experience I remember I mentioned about the woman in the hospital. She's completely, they think she's dead, right? They're keeping her alive. She's on the meditation table. Her senses have definitely ceased, but clearly from the way she responded when they got the circular saw to cut her open to take her organs, her heart went from 100 to 200 beats a minute, which indicates her subtle mind was totally conscious. This is not uncommon, which is why you keep the room peaceful and quiet. And people have so many experiences like that, the dream mind, the coma mind, being aware. That's your subtle mind. And then eventually the conscious will go, and you can see when it goes. One way to test if the mind is still there, because all the rest of the body is cold, because all the energies have come to the heart chakra. And if you put your hand just above the heart chakra, it will be distinctly warm if the mind is still there. Your dog as well. When it's cold there, the mind has left. Then you do what you like with it. You can have these the sky burial they had in Tibet. They still have sky burial. You once the mind has gone, you know, you take the body to these particular people whose job it is to cut it all up into different pieces, and all the big vultures are waiting. They're all very polite. They wait, cut it up, all the soft bits and the hard bits, all the bones chopped up, and the vultures come down and eat the lot. Most efficient. It's a good offering, isn't it? Better than using all this real estate for cemeteries. It's ridiculous. That's my opinion, by the way. That's not Buddha's opinion. Just me talking. So anyway, questions now. Come on. I don't know if I said anything sensible whatsoever, but are there any questions? Any questions? Yeah.
I'm wondering if people feel those sensations that you referred to when they're all drugged up in a hospital.
What do you mean, darling? Which
Well,
sensations?
Well, you know, any of the pain or feel any of the sinking feelings or any.
Which feelings? Which feelings?
The sinking.
Oh,
feeling,
I mean, no, before, yes, of course. I mean,
if they're all.
when
drugged
you're
up.
still conscious, when just the earth element, that's a common experience. I mean, I had the experience. I didn't die. Is one of the signs that you are happening. The death process is happening when your body feels like it's sinking. Absolutely, for sure. But once it gets more subtle ones, we're not aware. We're already gone by that point.
No,
I
I'm
think-
wondering if they're capable of
Who?
feeling that.
The earth, if
They're
what?
on drugs. She's like,
If they're on
On
drugs. In the
drugs.
hospital.
Okay, I mean,
like
I think it's, well, that's an interesting experience as well. I know when I used to have this weird arthritic pain, it was really intense. Really intense. I'd be kind of crying like a baby on the floor, you know. So one time my sister took me to the hospital in Melbourne. And I know other hospitals I go, they give me steroids, just instant relief. It was like heaven. These people didn't. It was ridiculous. They wanted to test me, you know. This unbelievable agony. So they gave me morphine. And I remember it was just horrible. I was hallucinating. It was horrible. Really hallucinating. So this is one of the really important points, which is quite difficult for our culture, is to really be the most important way to die is to be conscious. Because we think, oh, look at them, they're all drugged out. They look so peaceful. But we know that's absurd. Just because your body looks peaceful. But you could be, I mean, you know yourself, you could be lying there very peaceful and you wake up and you tell your husband you had a nightmare. No one could see. That's your subtle mind. It's exactly the same when if you're distressed in your mind, you're full of fear, you can medicate physical pain. You cannot medicate mental pain, which is the function of a person being there to keep you loved and supported and secure, or having mantras play. This is like miraculous because the subtle mind can hear mantra. I mean, there's so many experiences I can tell you of people who've been in comas, hearing, you know, even I told you the story about my friend Judy in Sydney. She was totally unconscious, always wired up, completely in a coma. And she knew these lamas, and I asked the students to ask the lamas to pray for Judy. And I'd say prayers in her ear. I used to go see her in the ER, you know. And I'd say prayers in her ear, and every time and again I'd say, Judy, Songsa Kensei Rinpoche is praying for you, a whisper, you know. Judy, His Holiness Sakya Prince is praying. And that was the only thing she remembered when she came out of a coma. Vividly, exactly those words. The number of people who hear mantras. I mean, because mantra is powerful. It's the Buddhas. And your subtle mind is capable, you know, your subtle mind can, this is a sleep mind, the dream mind, the coma mind, and the mind, even if you're dead, even if your breathing has stopped, your subtle mind can be still conscious. So that's the way to really help people, being there loving and supporting them when they're more conscious and talking to them about the Dharma or their Lama or the Buddha or whoever, or if your grandma's a Catholic, talk about Jesus and how God loves her. You know, these are things that are so important to calm people's minds down. Do you understand? But the animal is just the same. Who else? Questions, people? Any questions, darling? Yes.
At the time of when the heat element does leave at the
From the
heart,
heart chakra,
the,
when
yeah,
the
and
mind leaves.
indestructible drop. So I've heard there's also a drop of blood that can
That's
come
when
and
the
a drop of
conscious, that's a
semen.
sign.
That's
The
another sign.
the one that's easy is when you feel the heat gone. But the other one is, of course, because the red drop will then, depending on the female and male, they're different. The red drop will go down and come out through the vagina or the penis, and the white drop will come out through the nose. So that's a possibility. You can see those signs. They're the typical one. You'll see some liquid just there.
But that's not. For
That's a sign
everyone.
the mind has, no, that's all happens for
It
everybody.
happens for
Oh,
everyone.
everybody.
So everyone. Okay.
Usually it's both. And that's a good way to show that the mind has
The mind.
gone. So this is another way, just to feel the heat gone. Yeah, exactly. And you don't touch the body till then. That's the point. Yes.
So I experienced two big losses in the last 2 months. My
Yes,
mother
darling.
passed on
Yeah.
February 10th.
Yes.
And one of my best friends.
Can you hear her, people? You can't hear Cynthia talk in Zoom.
So I
Tell us that she had 2 losses recently.
No, we cannot hear her.
Okay, I'll have to repeat. Can we have the microphone, please? Where's the mic guy? What happened to him?
Is this one plugged in?
And then with Zoom, people have 2 questions.
Oh, good, darling. I'll talk here. Can we have the mic handed out to people, please? Or something. It's helpful if the people on the Zoom can hear it as well.
Not this one.
Oh, Nicole's got one. Good. It's okay. That's fine. Go, darling. Talk.
Yeah. So I experienced
Yeah.
2 big losses. My mother passed on February 10th after like 5 months of being sick. And one of my best friends in Barcelona, she passed away also on April 2nd. Very, very good friend. So I try to do my best on these practices.
I need to know if you were with them or were you just talking from the distance?
I spent time with my mother before,
Good.
like 2-3 times, but I was not there
At the time.
moment
Okay.
that I
Okay.
arrived following day.
I understand.
And my friend, I was here, she was in Barcelona, but I was helping her on the process with the Medicine Buddha
Good.
mantra,
Good.
and to my mother too. But the rest of the people was for me more painful than the death of these loved ones, because I was trying to share these practices, but the rest was like, no, like was rude. Like, okay, she's already there. In 2 minutes, they took the body away, and my sister-in-law started taking all the things around her, and it was like,
This is I know it's not uncommon, is it? It's a bit tragic.
this is,
Isn't it?
but she's there. So, and with my friend too. So I started telling the Medicine Buddha mantra to her on the phone, and
Good.
I asked
Good.
her son put the earrings, like things on her ears, so she can hear my voice with the Medicine Buddha mantra and pass the image all over her body, the telephone image of the Buddha, the image. And he refuses to do, and then he said, okay, I'm gonna do it just because you can't stop like bothering me with that. She's dying. And she responded. He said to me, well, she smiled. And she was already basically gone.
She'd stopped breathing, you mean?
Yes.
So that means her mind was still there. That shows it. It's exactly the proof. Many
But
times it's like that.
What to do because of our culture? There was no way
I
to
know.
keep my mother's body for 3 days.
This is the trouble. This is the trouble.
After
mean, this is
24
not-
hours.
It's just the way it is. Even trouble is not the right word to say. All this advice that Rinpoche is giving is the implication is the person reading it is in charge. And so often we're not in charge. Like your example is so clear, you're not in charge. So that's why all you can do is do your best. And then you can do other things like have prayers and pujas done in the monasteries and things. This can be of help. The best is to be there doing these things, but most of us won't have that. But certainly with our pets, we'll have it. We can help our pets, or a little bird you might find. With some people, we can have it with, but this is the problem. And most people, I mean, sometimes when I hear from doctors and nurses the terrible way that poor people die, people screaming over the father's body about the will and taking their things, it's just so beyond distressing. It's really true. So to be able for your mummy or your dog to have a death that's peaceful like this is pretty marvelous. So you do whatever you can. And for yourself, of course, this is the most precious thing. And to try and ensure that you have this by the living wills or what people talk about. You know, you show exactly what you want. And I've heard that in hospitals, they're very kind. They want to do the person's wishes. And I mean, I've been into hospitals, like one time in Australia, the family had a private room and the doctors were so kind, you know. There was a Vietnamese family and I came in and we did prayers and the doctor would come in quietly and just watch. They were very respectful. A friend of mine at a nursing home in Tasmania, she had her own private room for her husband. And when he died, she shooed out the doctors and nurses, locked the door and stayed there for 3 days. So if you know what you're doing, like my friend who's a devoted Buddhist didn't know what to do. So you miss the opportunity. So even if you get 5 minutes with somebody, it's precious, you know. Yeah.
So,
Yeah, isn't it?
so does the process not happen if the body is taken away? and placed in a freezer? Or
Okay, this is all part of what I want to talk about. These are the things I want to talk about. Well, I want to talk about the different scenarios. This is what we've got in the book. So this is the general idea. And then there are all these different chapters. What to do if your loved one dies at home. Well, that's the 3 days visit. That's the perfect scenario. You're in charge of it. You can have all the prayers done. Some people have 24 hours. In the monasteries, they have, when Lama Zopa died, for 3 days, 24 hours a day, monks and nuns took turn. 24 hours for 3 days. You can do all that. You've got the luxury to do all of this. The next best would be in a hospital with your own room. But even most hospitals, I mean, there's a woman who was it here? Who was the woman who died, who was the director of the center here years ago? Patty or something.
Cheryl?
Not Patty. Who died here years ago? Hmm? Who?
Yeah.
What?
We talked about
That's right. Now, Jackie and I went to visit her.
Pat Haber.
That's right. This is interesting. This is an example. I'm not trying to be rude about her family or anything, but they were Christians and they were happy to have us there, but they didn't want us there very long. And you could see it. She was in this bed. She had cancer, and she was you could tell she was so distressed in a hospital with the respect to kind doctors and nurses. Hospital is about the worst place to die. The noise is unbelievable. Other people's distress. You're in a ward with other people moaning and crying and doors banging and clanking machines. And the thing is, this is really clear. And again, from my own experience, seeing one old nun die, you become incredibly sensitive to the slightest shift in even the air or slight raising of voice. It can be beyond distressing for the dying person because your mind's getting more subtle. Your mind's getting more subtle. Darling, you do your best. You can't help it. And then this woman, Pat, she was devoted to Lama Zopa. So she was in the big ward right by the end, by the front door, the people coming by, banging. You could tell she was so distressed, drugged out of her brain, and that's the big thing. You've got to try and find the way to manage, not to be completely unconscious, but also to help alleviate the pain. It's not an easy one. But I remember we had an iPad of Lama Zopa singing Medicine Buddha, and we wanted them to put it next to her ear. But the hospital, the family were very kind, but they didn't. They said, "Oh, you're disturbing her peace." She clearly wasn't peaceful. And this would have helped because she was devoted to Rinpoche, and they wouldn't do it. I was just being respectful. But this is the big thing to realize. We think, oh, they're drugged, they're peaceful. It's just not true, And as you're dying, your mind gets so unbelievably sensitive. It has to be, as Rinpoche stresses it all the time, the main thing is to be absolutely quiet. This is impossible in hospitals unless you have your own private room. So unless your dog as well, it's just interesting to think about all these things. It's opposite to our culture, and especially these days with vets. When as you said, you were running a hospice for dying animals, and all the vets were angry with them, like you're being cruel to the animals. And this is just the culture now, and it's just very difficult to go against that. But the main thing is to be as quiet as possible, and the only sound, mantra or prayers, because that. And I know I mentioned this. I did this retreat. I mentioned that. And we had this nap every afternoon during my retreat. And this vivid experience of being crystal clear dreams, which is my subtle consciousness, but I was completely conscious of everything going around. Because when your subtle mind is so sharp and clear, you can be aware of the outside world as well. And that's why mantras are so powerful. Because because your mind's more subtle, you can feel the Buddha's energy at a more subtle level, and including the animals. It's the most precious gift you can give. Like my friend I mentioned recently, she was so distressed about her dog dying. And everyone's giving her different advice, and she didn't know what to do. So I didn't try to force her, but I didn't mention, what the Buddhist approach. So she decided she just got Lama Zopa and played Medicine Buddha. Her dog instantly became quite more peaceful. He ate his dinner. He looked more happy. He wasn't so distressed. So animals especially are so conducive to this kind of help. It's like miraculous, But utter peace, utter quiet is what's crucial especially when the death process is happening. If we can, that's why we have to be in control of it in advance and make our wishes known, This is why it's so important to think about these things. What else, people's questions, darlings? Yes, Patty. And Jean. And Sarah and Alex. Talk to me.
Venerable Ravina, first I'm going to read to you Jean's question. She doesn't have a workable mic, so I'm going to read it if I can find it. She asks, if a person has a virtuous life and is murdered, for example, and this creates fear, will their karma at the end stage of life move to positive or negative next life?
I understand, darling. I mean, I'll put it this way, until you're a really profound practitioner with bucket loads of practice under your belt and not much fear and plenty of virtue, it's likely that if something horrific happens, it'll trigger incredible fear. But it depends. It still depends, darling. I remember hearing about a person in a car accident, a mother, and she had her child there. And they were this horrific car accident. She talked about how all she thought of was her child. So she had total compassion in her mind. So it depends on the person and the time and the karma they have. You can't give a simple answer. But put it this way, which we don't like to hear, it's not impossible if you've lived a virtuous life to have a very heavy negative karma ripen at the time of death. It's not impossible. And equally, it's not impossible that you lived a heavy life, but a virtuous karmic seed can be triggered because you change your mind at the time of death. So, but we shouldn't be depressed about that. We just should understand the intricacies of karma and do what we can and ensure that we can have an environment, set up the environment is conducive to a peaceful death. This is in our own hands by having these living wills and everything and doing what we can for other people. So it's not impossible, but you can't guarantee. All we can do is do our best, you know. But karma can change. I mean, that's why, from the one point of view, that woman, at the time, Lama Zopa says in this chapter, what to do. One of the chapters is what to do if your loved ones give their organs. And he talks about the dangers of this, but we discussed it. So this woman, at the time she, you know, because her motive was so pure, and she really praises, all the lamas praise this unbelievable motivation to want to help others by giving your organs. It's very amazing. So she would have died very peacefully with a virtuous motivation, which would have triggered a virtuous karma. But because her mind was disturbed when they cut the organs, because she must have been observing what was going on. I talked about this 2 days ago. I don't know if you all heard it. This woman, I'll say it again. There's this woman who gave in the hospital this book I read called The Undead, this American journalist who was reporting on the business of giving organs and the difficulties in these days in the American medical profession. People, you know, coming back to life, all these problems now that are causing them to question their assumptions about what consciousness is. So he had a whole chapter, this fellow, on out of body experiences during an operation, and that they can't explain it. But it totally fits with the Buddhist one. It's the subtle consciousness. You don't technically leave your body, but the experience is that you're floating above your body. That's your mental consciousness. So this woman, there she was, supposedly dead. They're keeping her alive. She's on the she's on the operating table. And the moment the nurse who was monitoring the heartbeat saw the moment they got the circular saw to cut her in half and take her organs, her heart went from 100 to 200 beats a minute. This shows that her subtle mind was conscious. So she would have freaked out. That's a sign she's freaking out, and that can easily change her karma to negative karma. That's the danger that Lama Zopa talks about in the book. He says, you've got to be careful. It doesn't mean everybody. I mean, I've had a couple of operations, but I was completely anesthetized. It was lovely. I thought, where can I get some more of this? It was so delicious. It was the best sleep I've ever had in my life. It was a miracle. I loved it. I couldn't believe it. Can you get it over the counter? No, you can't, can you? I couldn't believe it. It was the deepest, most restful sleep I'd ever had. Oh, I couldn't believe it. It was heaven. Anyway, get my point, people. So even on the death, you know, so same with people on drugs, you can be conscious. Anyway, whatever. Questions, more questions here. Yeah.
Jean says, thank you very much.
Thank you. Good, Jean. Good.
Yes. Okay. Venerable Robina, I had a question about the subtle consciousness, the white, the red, and then the darkness.
Yeah,
and
that's like the three signs. Yes.
Right. Before you enter the clear light. And I understand that it's highly realized yogis that spend that time in the clear light. But
they can go through that process, meditating on emptiness all the way and get to the clear light and then stay there for hours, days, months, even weeks, some of them. Yeah. Sorry.
Okay. So, but as far as our pets or are just regular,
up to 3 days. If we be unconscious, we can be up to 3 days. We can stay there.
Okay. So, and that's just the white and the red and the darkness can take 3 days to get.
That takes, we're sitting at the clear light. But we're unconscious. We're at the clear light level. I think that's what takes the 3 days. You just sit there. The mind doesn't leave the body. It doesn't. I don't think the actual process takes 3 days. So I think I've got a feeling you're at the clear light at that point. I'm not sure.
Okay. And for me, I wouldn't recognize that I was in the clear light and that I
until you're a great meditator, you will not recognize. I mean, if we can't do it at sleep time, we know we can't do it at sleep time. We're not conscious of the gradual deconstruction of these elements at the time of sleep. That's the proof that we can't do it at death. Do you understand?
I do.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank
Okay.
you.
Yes, Sarah and Alex.
Venerable Rabina, so sometimes people find themselves in the situation where they're placed on life support because of some emergency intervention that was taken to save their lives.
Yes.
And then perhaps it becomes apparent that this person will not survive.
Mm.
So as family members, we're in this difficult situation
That's
now of,
I know.
should we discontinue the life support? You know, it feels almost
I know
like
it's so difficult now. It's forcing us to make decisions like taking people's lives, isn't it? Because we're so kind of talented now. We're so technologically brilliant now, but it has all these awful dilemmas, isn't it? But I know His Holiness has said that, you know, with the purest motivation, and of course at that time, because you'd make sure you had prayers and pujas done, that it's appropriate to save money rather than spending millions of dollars with your insurance and all these things to keep a person alive when there's clearly no chance. I mean, if normal things had taken place, they would have just died, you know. But now, because we have all this technology, it's unfortunate. So it's not inappropriate to do it, but you would do as many prayers and practices as possible, and then you would, at a most appropriate time, you would then allow them to die naturally, take the wires away. Or, I mean, that happened to me one time in Santa Cruz when a friend of ours, a Buddhist fellow, husband and a wife and the daughter were all Buddhist, and then Paul had a heart attack and he'd asked his wife to promise not to call the ambulance, but she panicked and she called the ambulance. So he didn't want to be kept alive. He wanted us to die naturally with prayers and things. So he got into the hospital and we went there at dawn and we did all the prayers that we knew he wanted, and you could tell he was distressed. He didn't want all these wires in him. So then we did all the prayers, and then we said, look, then their daughter gave permission to stop, you know. And then there's another approach about the fridge and everything. This is also the interesting point, the various ways you can, if you can't have your loved one in home for 3 days. So we couldn't do that. Actually, when Lama Yeshe passed away in 1982, the laws in California allowed us to take his body from Cedars Sinai in LA, drive him down to the center of Vajrapani Institute in Northern California and stay there for 3 days. But now they don't let you do that. So we weren't able to take Paul's body home. So they were very kind. They wrapped him up. They took him gently, put him in the ambulance, took him to the mortuary, or to the, what do you call it, the funeral home. And then we were able to visit every day. And I remember even we asked if we could stay all night and pray prayers, and they said no. They put him in the fridge with the other bodies. So we gave them a CD of the Gyuto monks chanting, and they promised they'd play the CD in the fridge. So probably the other dead bodies got the Gyuto monks as well. You know? That was the Jewish and the Catholics probably got shocked, you know, hearing these Buddhist monks chanting. Anyway, so we did that for 3 days. But another thing you can do, and it's in Lama Zopa's book, and hospitals do this. They sometimes keep bodies for 6 months because of legal problems and families in other countries. You can ask them after, because normally what happens is, as Lama Zopa said, if you die in a hospital, even if you've got 30 minutes, use that to do the prayers and practices, and then they can take the body. You do, but he said you could, if you wanted, to get them to put it in the fridge and leave the body there for 3 days, you know, and you could do prayers and practices at home. So it's not possible, it's not impossible to do that. It's a question of the hospital you die at. So you've got the 3 days to do practices and prayers for the person's sake. Because at the mind, because when they take the body after half an hour, you know, you can do the checking. You can do one other thing, you can do the checking here, or checking if the mind hasn't left, then you can try and force the mind to leave. And one good way to do that, they say you tap very strongly, or you pull the hair at the crown chakra very vigorously, and that can encourage the consciousness to go up the central channel and leave through the crown chakra, which means it could help the mind take a pure land birth. So you try to do that with your dog as well. If you have to take the dog's body away, there's different things you can do to help the mind leave in an appropriate way. Because I mean, otherwise they're going to rough up the body and do different things, and it can be distressing for the person if you disturb the body, you know. Yeah, anyway, go on. Who else? Something else? More questions on the Zoom? No. Any questions here? Yes, darling.
I have a question about what you were saying about sleep.
Sleep.
Because my perception of sleep is that how you go into sleep, but it's a practice of letting go. So if you're willing to fall asleep easily, you're willing to die peacefully.
That's an interesting point. If you can practice that and have control over it, that's a very good thing. If you can learn to practice, and I think even, yeah, but if you learn to practice consciously trying to train your mind to go to sleep nicely and relax. And then even another thing is a very good practice would be to make a strong aspiration to be conscious that you're dreaming. Lots of people have that experience, and that's a very good sign, because you can learn to be in control. So to try to learn to go to sleep very easily, with a happy mind, with a virtuous mind, and then even to try and see your dreams as dreams would be very good. But the only way to really have control over the process for death is to meditate on these particular practices throughout your life. You know? Do you understand? That's a good, interesting point. I mean, people sleep very badly. I've met very few people who really sleep well. We're distressed, we have weird dreams, you know. It's interesting, isn't it? But seeing your dreams as dreams is a very good practice. Practicing seeing your dreams as dreams. Because you see, everything's stored. This is an interesting point about the Buddhist view. Apart from the karmic view, that the qualitative one of whatever you do and say and think, depending on your motivation, will ripen as experiences. But the other thing is whatever you've seen, heard, tasted, touched, smelt, since beginningless time is merely literally stored as memories in your mind, which is why you can eventually get clairvoyance and see countless past lives, because all the memories are stored. So, you know, you can, I mean, so then for people, because when you go to dream, it's your subtle mind. That's why people have terrible dreams sometimes, visions of it's past lives and stuff, you know. So if you can learn to be aware of your dream, then as soon as you realize you're dreaming, the fear dissipates. It's a very good practice to have control over your dreams. It's very powerful. What else, people? Yes, Tom.
Since most of us we don't believe we're really going to die.
That's right. Yeah, that's right.
So near the time of death, we have fear and grasping. So does that mean that
Very
at
strongly.
that time we finally realize we're dying?
Well, that's, I think, my feeling is because, I mean, if the Buddha's view is right, I always want to say it like that because we might prove Buddha's wrong, but let's assume Buddha's right, and we have had countless lives, and we have died countless times. Those memories are there. That's why we have so much fear. That's why we have this primordial fear inbuilt from lifetime after lifetime of grasping at permanent me. And people, I mean, animals know they're dying sometimes. I've heard that. People know it's coming. So many people talk this way because instinctively the memory of it somehow there, and we can feel it coming. So when you're resisting that, and that's what the grasping at the time of death, it's a powerful grasping. And I think the thing is, you see, okay, let's analyze what the grasping is all about. The fear. Fear comes from attachment. So attachment, it's obvious. Attachment it's multifaceted. One function of attachment is to hold on to what you've got and not let go. That's pretty clear, isn't it? Do you understand? Another function of attachment, we all know this, is constantly looking into the future, constantly anticipating, planning, now do this and now do that and now go there, and fantasizing into the future continuously, looking forward to something. Do you understand? Look at depression. You've got nothing to look forward to. Attachment's kind of collapsed and you're now in despair because you can think of nothing to look forward to. That's the fear. That's the despair of not having attachment. Attachment is this ridiculous, perky part of us, always imagining the future, which keeps us buoyant. But it's like a joke when suddenly death is coming. And finally, if you're a materialist, which is most people who've never thought about death, there's finally the realization there is nothing to look forward to. So talk about fear. Of course, it's gigantic fear. You're going to fall into a black hole. It's the best you can expect. Who wants to fall into a black hole? Nobody. But this is why it's so interesting. Rinpoche talks about, like say, your Catholic mummy. How you help your Catholic mummy is you talk about God to, you don't tell her, God, mummy, think of God. You talk about God. Well, mummy, you know, I've been thinking about God lately. You know, really, God loves us all. And she'll kind of perk up. Oh, does he love me too? Oh, wow. Maybe she's forgotten her practice. You remind her of God. You tell her how beautiful heaven is. So at least, as Rinpoche says, you're using your attachment to look forward to heaven. So you learn, then at the time of death, you've got to let go of this one because finally there's no choice. So at least if you're looking forward to heaven, you relax. It's okay, I can let go. And that's why thinking about rebirth, the same thing. You look forward to Amitabha's Pure Land. You look forward, you plan and organize for the next life. It's so practical, but it sounds hilarious to us, you know, to organize your next life. It sounds like a joke. Do you understand? And that's the thing that really struck me when I edited this book. It finally kind of, one thing dawned on me that actually it is my job. It's not Lama Zopa's going to make me, you know, okay, I'm all right, I'm a good girl, Lama Zopa will take care of me. It's rubbish. I've got to create the causes for my next rebirth. And what's that mean? Don't kill, don't lie, live in my vows, try and be a good girl, try not to bash everybody up and be mean and nasty and say rude words, which I do. They can tell you today I said very rude words. I'm very naughty. People are shocked. One time on one of my prisoners, I even said I swore, and he just sees this. He said, Rabina, you don't swear. You're this nice little old lady. I couldn't believe it. People see me as a nice little old lady. Anyway, never mind. So you're trying to be a nice person and create good karma by living in vows, you know. Then keep remembering I'm going to die soon, you know. It's okay. And try to be ready for it. Try to look forward to it so you don't resist it. Resisting something is what fear comes from. And that's what it's grasping at, holding on to this, which is our instinct every millisecond of our daily life. And then you relax and look forward to tomorrow and the next day and lunch and dinner and a holiday and now I'm going to go to Italy and now go here. Always looking forward to something, which is what keeps us buoyant. But it's attachment. Are we communicating? Which doesn't mean you can't plan to go to Italy. Just remember you mightn't get there, that's all. You know, it could change. I mean, that's the only thing. Nothing wrong with planning to go to Italy or whatever. But knowing things change, which is impermanent. Do you understand, people? Just training our minds to be practical. But attachment is the cause of suffering because it's holding on to something. It doesn't want to let go. So it's a bit skillful. Looking forward to heaven if you're a Catholic or looking forward to rebirth is a skillful means. It's like a kid. They won't let go of what's in this hand. So you trick them by giving something in this hand so they'll drop this one. It's just tricking attachment and looking, instead of holding on, you look forward. It's just tricking it. It's very wise, actually. I mean, best is to have no attachment, but if you're going to have it, you just use it wisely, you know. At least you can die peacefully. Bye-bye, people. I'm out of here. See you next life. Goodbye. You know, and as Rinpoche says, death is only fearful because of attachment. Death is not fearful in its nature. It's only because of attachment that we can't stand the thought of not being me, of losing me and mine. Of course, it's gigantic. I mean, this entire bubble of our lives. We know ourselves, even if something slightly changes in our life, we have a panic attack, you know? If we lose something, even our lovely cup breaks, we have a panic attack because we've got so much attachment, you know? Isn't it? Anyway, there we go. What else? So as for all the practices, I mean, there's so many, I can't even begin to talk about them. But as Rinpoche says, because what he does, he's got so many practices. And so in the chapters on the practices, we've divided them all into say like, you know, there's a whole series of chapters. What to say, for example, what to look at. So, you know, pictures of the guru, pictures of the Buddha. If your mummy's a Catholic, pictures of Jesus or the saints or whoever you want. So and this is the big point. A major part of it is to make the room beautiful. This is something surprising. Sick rooms are usually the worst places, but make it beautiful. To have a beautiful, like lovely views with the curtains open, say the sky or the sea. Because when the mind is, you're sick and you're miserable, you wake up and everything's cluttered and dark and noisy and medicines. It's just depressing. You need to make the person peaceful and spacious. So to really make the room beautiful, don't have junk in there. Everything in that room should be only for the benefit of the dying person, whatever helps this. We've got senses. So the only thing you should hear is the mantras or the prayers and the person and nice, sweet things. The only thing you should see is the things that will help your mind, leave imprints in your mind, you know, to help you die peacefully. It's very conscious. It's very kind of focused and conscious. And this is an interesting point too. When you're dying, keep your pets out. This is so shocking. Because you know, if you're so attached to your pet when you're dying, you just turn into a dog yourself. You'll get born as a dog. I mean, all due respect to your pets. Margaret, I'm sorry, I have to keep Joey out when you're dying, all right? Joe will be barking away, wanting Margaret. But if Margaret can be compassionate at the time of her death, it's okay. But if we're just natural and got attachment and you cling to your pets and cling to your pussy and your doggy, it's just not good for your mind. It's the same even as having, Lama Zopa says, if they're real, like people you're really attached to, like your grandma or somebody, and the people she's attached to, and she hasn't worked on her mind, you've got to make the room as beautiful as possible for her not to arise attachment. So, you know, one of the things I see in old people's homes, they're drugged out of their brains and they have the television blasting all day and night. Unbearable. I mean, their mind is so distressed. So I remember this one lady I went to see in California. She was really, you could tell she was so distressed. Finally dawning on her that yes, she was dying. You know, she had cancer. She lived on her own. People were coming to take care of her. She knew a bit about the lamas and practice, but not much. And she was so much fear. You could see it. And I'd really never sat with people who were dying. And I kind of had to think, well, what do you think is going to be useful? So I sang mantras, just that. The sound of Om Mani Padme Hum singing, and you could see it immediately calmed her mind. I remember one old crazy lady, one who was out of her brain in an old people's home. I sang mantra and instantaneously she calmed down. Even if it's not mantra, just peaceful sounds can can kind of focus the mind, because attachment has to hold on to something. So give them a beautiful thing to hold on to. It's calming for them. But to have news and loud. So this lady in this cancer, I did my little roster with her, and then they had the television on the whole time. And of course, attachment grasps at it. You'll hold on to anything for days, you know. You'll grasp at anything that's there. Attachment wants anything desperately. So then often it's best to have nothing. So what happened was, she liked Lama Yeshe, so I left one of those, not before the videos, there's other things, the tape, you know. And when I left, they put it into the television, but it broke. So the television didn't work. Well, she died in an hour because suddenly there was peace. Her mind was able to let go and relax, you know. So I remember one time at one course, this one lady said she was taking turns in taking care of their friend. And she liked Patsy Cline, so they played Patsy Cline, and the pets were in the room, and they'd tour, all the friends cracking jokes, talking about memories. We think that's nice, you know. And then we talked about this, and she said, when I did my roster, I turned off Patsy Cline, chucked out the pets, stopped talking, and then the woman was able to relax. We don't understand attachment in our culture. We think it's being happy. Attachment wants to cling to anything. It's dreading dying. So you give it just rubbish, and it's going to distress the mind terribly when the death does happen. You know, it's all really practical advice. You know, it's very fascinating. To make the room beautiful, and the people, if you are able to have control, really select the people. And you're going to have all the troublemakers screaming about the will, and the noisy ones, and the ones that are so attached to their mind get so distressed. It's whoever distresses the person. You never talk about fighting. You do not raise your voice. You don't have people who are attachment. Everything should be the benefit of the dying person to help them be peaceful. Peaceful.
That's the key.
That's
I'm
right.
sorry. Yeah.
You
I was one of my clients asked me to be there, a part of her death process. I had to send her husband out of the room several times because she would be really close, and he'd come in and have all of this, you know,
Emotion,
hysterical.
yes. That's right.
And he was a retired Marine, like a tough Marine guy who was just falling apart. And every time he would come in, the heart would start racing again. And
that's right. That's right. Very distressing for the person. That's exactly right. Exactly.
So at the end, it was just me and her daughter. None of the big, strong guys could be
I understand.
there.
No, I understand.
At the time
have the
of death,
microphone,
they all
please.
had to go. They could
have the microphone, please. Where's the microphone?
Yeah.
So what's it?
Yeah.
Go on, darling. Yeah, go on. What's the story? What's happening? Yes.
Venerable Robina, what is the phenomena that causes people that are dying to see loved ones like within a day or two?
I think it's because
Sometimes
okay, I understand that. It's very common, isn't it? It's a really good question. Okay, all we can do, so say the question with the mic, please. Go. Go. She's asking, what's happening when people see their loved ones, after their loved ones died, they have a vision of their loved one, they see their loved one, they feel the presence of their loved ones, that kind of thing. Okay, first of all I can do is give you the Buddhist view of this type of phenomena. So the Buddhist view is that there are different realms of rebirth. One is animal, one is human, one is the gods, one is the spirits, and one is the hell beings. They're the options. Then there's the bardo. They're the options, right? So now, one option would be if they see their loved one, because that's the memory you have of your loved one, because that's the vision you have of your loved one. If their consciousness is around, even though they might be in the spirit realm, you'll see a vision of them in their form. You know how people have houses that are haunted, and they see 18th century ladies. But clearly the woman is not looking like an 18th. That's how she looked then. So somehow the memory of how the person was is the vision that appears to you, according to the karma. I remember there's a story about, so they could be in the hell realms. You don't know who the person is, but if they're usually if they're in the hell realms on an animal realm or a human realm, you can't be seeing them. So it has to be your own mind. But if they're in the bardo or the spirits, possible. Because if your grandma's already born as a dog or already born as a human, you can't see them ghosting around. It's not possible. So if they are, it has to be the spirits or the bardo. But what's interesting about the bardo, Lama Zopa says, the moment your mind leaves your body, you stop being Robina, and from that second, you're now the intermediate state being, and you have no memory of your past life. You can even see your body, but you have no recognition. So you wouldn't be hanging around. if you're in the bardo. But if it's spirits, for sure you would, because you're super attached to those people. That's what caused you to be born as a spirit, as a hungry ghost, or as a spirit. So it could be that. But seeing in the form of, so, you know, I remember like the ghost one, you see it in the form that you know. I remember this interesting experience years ago, 25 years ago, I saw on the web some movie the doctor made interviewing his patients who had near-death experiences. It was really fascinating. And one of these fellows who he interviewed, who was an alcoholic, he said, and he had this experience of literally walking along a tunnel, but at the end of the tunnel was hell, a fire, a conflagration, unbelievable fire, and his friends in their human form in hell screaming, don't come here, go back, go back. Now, if they are, so the Buddhist view would describe different realms of existence, which are mental states. So you've got your beloved and they're in this, they're having that experience. Of course, you'd see them as if they're in their own body, which of course they're not. That person's dead, but that's the vision you have of that person. So you see them in their form. Do you understand?
Yes.
It has to be something like that. The best I can say. What else, people? Yeah.
You said that we have.
Let's have the mic. Let's have the mic. Go, sweetheart. Oh, this question. Here, darling. Second. Okay. Go, sweetheart.
Hi.
Take them. Would you mind? Do you mind?
So
Thank you.
I know you were also, is this on?
No, it doesn't sound like it.
It doesn't sound like it's on. Is that on? Okay. So you were talking about attachments in the room, and you were speaking about, having to send certain members out. So there's not supposed to be attachments in the room when someone's dying, and yet there will be people there who you love and they love.
That's right. Of course they will.
So
You do your best to contain your attachment, and you realize that you're there for their sake. So be loving and peaceful and supportive, not emotional and teary and grasping. That's the key piece.
Still have that feeling of attachment to you.
Who?
The person who's
Well,
dying,
that's the whole point. If the attachment to you is so strong, it distresses them, get out of the room, please. Like her friend, her heart would beat, she'd freak out when the husband came in. So one has to be not like a policeman, but be very wise that whatever increases their attachment would be distressing them. So we can't be, well, I think if you look at your loved one and they're distressed when they look at someone, I think it's pretty clear. I think it's got to use your wisdom, be very, very gentle and kind, and encourage people who do, especially if they're unconscious too, or half conscious, to tell them, people to be, just educate people to be quiet, don't cling, don't grasp, don't cry, because it doesn't help the dying person. We'll do our best, all we can do. And that's the same with the animals, not to show them a lot of emotion, to be very peaceful around them. That's what then their minds get so distressed so easily, Yes, Graciela. Here we go. All right, sweetheart.
Yeah. So you would mention that if we have 30 minutes.
Bit louder, closer. Even if you have 30 minutes before they take the body. Yeah.
Beyond the mantras, what else or what prayers?
This is in Rinpoche's book. There's so many practices to do. There's no point in me saying them. There's so many. They're all listed in the book, all there and recommended. This one, that one. But I mean, for example, if it's a particular practice that a loved one does, you do that practice. There's another particular practice in the Garupas. We call them the 8 prayers at the time of death. The King of Prayers, a whole bunch of different prayers traditionally that are done. There's lots of advice in the book telling you exactly what to do in that half an hour. It's called How to Face Death Without Fear by Lama Zopa. It's both digital and paperback. It's really practical. Yeah. Yeah. Somebody else. Yes, darling.
I just wanted to mention, I think it's on Showtime. There's a series called Time of Death.
Can you give her the mic, please?
On Showtime?
Not on.
It is.
Okay, try and talk close to the mic.
Okay, on Showtime, there is a series called Time of Death, and it's very interesting. It follows several people as they're dying.
Okay.
I just thought I would mention.
Good. Okay. Showtime. Good. All right. Thank you, darling. Okay. So what else to talk about? So there's the, something else?
I have a question.
Go, sweetheart. Yes.
Thank you. Well, this is more of a concern. You talked about it takes 3 days
For the mind to leave.
Yes.
Usually up to 3 days.
Yes, and then you referred to the lady that was about to have her organs taken.
Yeah.
She wouldn't have been actually conscious of pain or anything, or is that just
No, she wouldn't have physical pain because her body was finished.
Okay.
But it's this freaking out. We can only assume from the heart going from 100 to 200 beats a minute that her subtle mind was still there and that she was conscious. She saw them literally getting the circular saw. She knows she's still who she is, and she can't believe that they think she's dead. She knows she's not dead. She doesn't know what's going on.
And you actually said you were actually not dead until
Well, of course,
after that.
no.
And so
Okay,
then you just
okay,
breathed
okay.
in.
What I'm saying is,
So I just wanted to clarify
no, of
that
course,
because
darling.
I'm just kind of freaking out about
I
that.
understand. The mind goes through these. There's these. By the time you stop breathing, which is death for the West, right? The grosser consciousness, your senses have ceased, your heart has stopped, your brain has stopped, so you are technically dead for the modern world. But with the subtle mind, which is like the mind you dream with, which is the mind that's there in a coma, and it's the mind that's there up to 3 days after you've stopped breathing, that is there. And people can be conscious like you can be in an operating table. Just like the same person on an operating table, totally anesthetized, right? Their sensory consciousnesses cannot function, but their mental consciousness is still there. And they've got the experience of seeing exactly what is going on and report it after they come out of the anesthetic. Well, it's exactly the same for a person who's so-called dead. Their gross consciousness has ceased, but their subtle mind is still there. So they have some people, not everybody would have that, have the experience, and her heart going from 100 to 200 beats a minute at the same time as they picked up the circular saw seems pretty evident to me that that's what she was experiencing. She was seeing it happening. So she freaked out because she doesn't know she's technically, she doesn't know she stopped breathing. She doesn't know that. Are you seeing my point? So she doesn't know that she's called dead by these people. She just knows she sees them with a circular saw above her head. She's watching and she sees them about to cut her open. So of course she's going to freak out. Are you seeing my point now? Can you see the point or not?
No, I do. I just wanted to clarify that because that's what I thought you'd say. It's kind of scary.
Can you get the mic, please?
I'm sorry. I was going to something.
It's all right, darling. We want to hear you. The people on the Zoom want to hear you.
I wanted to clarify that because it's quite a scary thought.
Precisely. That's the whole point. Lama Zopa says in the chapter, very gently, the hospitals should be very careful. That's the danger. That's the one and only danger. That if that's happening, the point is that woman, because her motivation was so pure to want to give her organs, that at the time she did go through the death process of the stopping breathing, that a virtuous karmic seed would have been triggered, which was programming her to take a future human rebirth. So that karma is there. It hasn't ripened yet because she hasn't left her body. It's already programmed though. So she's on the operating table. Now she's observing they're going to cut her open and she thinks she's still alive. So she freaks out. That can change the karma and cause a negative karmic seed to be triggered and to then get a suffering rebirth. That's the only danger that Lama Zopa is talking about. You see, you with me? It's a very good point. Get clear. So not everybody would have the experience. Not everybody would. Not everybody has the experience of out-of-body experiences during an operation, So it doesn't have to be a danger for everybody. And the other interesting point I asked Rinpoche, is it possible that even after your organs have been cut out, your mind is still in the body? He said yes. So that could have caused her mind to leave the body because she freaked out, It could have. But on the other hand, you might have the operation, they cut your organs open, but your mind is still in the body. So it could be perfectly fine. And then you'd keep the body still for a couple of days until you see the sign the mind has left the body. Do you understand, people? Are we communicating? Go on, microphone, please.
If the consciousness is still in the body, it's really, and you're aware.
Who's aware?
In this case, that woman was aware, if she had practice and was aware that they were doing what they were doing.
It'd be very surprising to have practice at that level, unless she's a yogi. If she's a yogi, yes, she'll know what's going on.
So that's possible, but it's possible to have the awareness that's happening, what's happening.
If you, sorry, what?
It's impossible. It's possible to be in the clear light where
she's not in the clear light. Well, I mean, if you're in the clear life, I think a yogi wouldn't have their organs taken away until they're dead anyway. They wouldn't do it. So if you're a yogi, you wouldn't let them do that. You wouldn't do it. You wouldn't do it.
Yeah.
You'd say, take my organs when I've finished my meditation, please.
Right. And that's Tugdom, right?
What?
When you're talking about the meditation after the breath has ceased, that's Tugdom? Is that the word?
I don't know that word. I never use it. I don't know. You Ning Papas use it. I don't know it. I know I've heard the word, but I don't know what it means. I don't know what it means. I think it's referring to the yogis who are able to go through the process. I've got a feeling it means that. I don't know that. I don't know. What else, people?
Lisa has a question.
Yes, darling.
I think in our society, they're not going to wait 3 days to take organs. Don't they want
To do what?
to take organs? They want to take it right away.
No, that's the trouble. They because for them, waiting 3 days, it'll turn into rubbish. So that's the thing.
So if you are giving your organs
Yeah.
to somebody,
Yeah.
is that changing the person's karma? Because
Whose karma?
the person that's getting the organ.
What do you mean by changing their karma?
Because if they're losing a kidney or it doesn't work,
Sure.
does that mean their life is being shortened for karma for a reason, and now you're replacing?
I wouldn't say it like that. It just means, it just means if if I'm sick and you're my sister and you decide to give me your kidney, well, then how kind you are. And that's the result of my past generosity to you that you give me your kidney. It just means I've got good karma. But I get your kidney. Thank you very much. Okay. And it's kind of you to give me your kidney as well. So that's it. It just means virtuous karma.
Just one.
And the other one, no one's asked this question, but I find this very fascinating. The number of people who say they feel qualities of the person whose organ it is. My sense is, first of all, it cannot be the mind of the person. The mind is gone. Your mind does not reside in the kidney. It's not possible. But my sense is this is my own interpretation. Think about this. If my mother, my consciousness left my past body, the karma was triggered by me, my virtuous karma with my mother, intense history. And when she hopped into bed with my daddy, my mind ran into her body. Now, my feeling is the intense karmic connection of a mother and a child is beyond insane. I mean, a person literally gives you a body. Talk about karma. So my feeling is you got a strong karmic connection with that person, right? Well, equally, a person gives you a kidney. It's a pretty intense karmic connection to have with a person from some past life. But they actually keep you alive so no wonder you feel their presence. It's not their kidney that causes it. It's because you've got a karmic connection with that person, is what I'd say. Do you understand? I mean, that's pretty intense. You get a life because of some kind person giving you their kidney. It's pretty amazing. Strong karmic history with that person. It has to be. Yes, Patty, and yes, Jean.
Oh, is Jean's hand up? Because I was just going to read the question for her.
Yes, it is.
Okay, so she says, during the dying process, what's the best next life to concentrate on so I can detach from this one peacefully?
Human's best. Human or Pure Land. And I've got to talk about Pure Land now. There's only two options, human or Pure Land. That's it. And therefore, it's sort of like this is when I was working on the book, I was always thinking about, it's practical. So if if you want to, if I want to go to Italy, the first thing is I have to have the thought I want to go to Italy. Otherwise, if someone says, you want to go on a holiday? Oh yeah, wherever's best. People often say, what kind of rebirth are you going to get? Oh, whatever's best. I mean, that won't get you to Italy, will it? You got to say, I want to go to Italy. And then you got to create the causes to go to Italy. You got to get the airfare, you got to work it out, you buy your ticket, you get to the airport, and you get on the plane. Then you'll get to Italy. It's hardly complicated. Well, how do you get a human birth? You got to know what the causes are. What's the ticket? The ticket is to live in vows, don't kill, in particular, don't kill, but also don't lie, don't steal, live in good vows, help others. You want to meet the Buddhas in future life? Tick the box. Yep, I better practice with the Buddhas. Have the Buddhas every day. Practice, practice, practice. Do your mantras, do your practices. Then you'll get a human birth. It's kind of logical. Hardly surprising. Karma takes care. We don't trust it like that. We think, oh, it's all just mystical. You got to create the cause. I want a human body. So if you want a human body, check up what the airfare is. The airfare is live in vows, and also you want a decent human body in a decent family, so you have leisure. So you need the other karma is generosity. You need non-killing karma and generosity karma, and connection with the Dharma. So you create the causes to get that. That's it. Now the other one is, we've got time. The Pure Land. This is hilarious. I heard about Amitabha's Pure Land, and I go, how ridiculous. I don't want to go to stupid old Pure Land, I want to be born a human. I kept thinking like that all my life. I think that way. And then when I read this book, I edited this book, and then I knew it wasn't finished. And I had to add pieces to it. And then Holly, Venerable Holly, Lama Zopa is one of his secretaries. This is back in 2012 or 14 or something. And she sent me after Rinpoche's, one of the first teachings Rinpoche gave after his stroke. It was an initiation into Amitabha and a short teaching about the benefits of going to Amitabha's Pure Land. And then I read this, I thought that's the missing piece for the book. And then now I'm a complete fan of going to Amitabha's Pure Land. So I've got to now explain what a Pure Land is. Okay, 3 minutes to go. We'll have to do another teaching. Okay, I'll do another teaching. So the first one is human. So if you're going to die tonight, Jean, make sure you're living in your vows of non-killing. Practice lots of generosity, and just keep living your vows. And then when you go to sleep, you think, if I die, may I get a nice human mummy? And then karma takes care. And the other one is Amitabha's Pure Land. We'll have another day for that one. So I hope you don't die tonight, Jean. Okay. All right. So let's go. Finish. That's it. Good night. Jangchub, Semchog, Rinpoche, Ma Ke Panam, Ke Guchi, Ke Panyampa Mepa Yang, Gong Ne Gondu, Papa Shog, Gewa Din, Yudu Dag Nama Sange Drub Yone, Drowa Chikyang Malupa De Sala, Gurpa Shog. Thank you, darling people on Zoom and everybody here in Deerfield Beach, Florida. Goodbye, darlings. Everybody. See you tomorrow or somewhere. Okay. We'll continue with this.
Thank you so much.
Thank
Hey,
you.
darlings. Much love. Bye.
Thanks, Lou.